The last month of reading in 2025 was a really good one for me. I managed to read two classics that I'd had on my to-read list for the entire year, as well as getting through two more of my Junji Ito collections, putting me up to 13 read in total now. Welcome to Painful Pages, and welcome to my reading recap for the month of December. Now, as with my TBR video previously, I will start with the books first and then go on to the manga second, and there will be video chapters at the bottom. So if you do want to skip ahead to the manga section, feel free to do so. A fair warning, there may be spoilers for some of the books that I am going to talk about today. So if any of them do come up that you are planning on reading, then obviously please do go and read it first before coming back to the video if you want to hear my thoughts about it. So first up from the horror books that I read in December, we have the Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. Now, this doesn't need any introduction to those of you that do read horror. I'm sure you're aware of what it is, but this is of course, the novella that the film Hellraiser is loosely based on. Now, at 128 pages, I believe it was quite a nice short read to begin the month with. And I really, really enjoyed it. I knew I was going into it, just given everything I'd sort of seen and heard about the book and Clive Barker and all things like that. But yeah, no, I really, really enjoyed it. The book is focused around a woman called Julia, who's married to a man named Rory. But she actually is in love with Rory's brother Frank. Now that is a key point to the story and is established very, very early on. But the book opens with Frank in like an abandoned house, opening a puzzle box called the Lament Configuration. That's its more sort of popular name nowadays, so I'm just going to call it that because I'm not sure how to pronounce the French name that it is originally. But that box, once you do complete opening it, it's sort of you're given the promise of sort of uh, pleasure and experiences that can't be experienced in the sort of the mortal world, as it were. Frank does successfully manage to open that box and is promptly sort of taken away by a group of four Cenobites, which are sort of hell priests, the expertise in pleasure and pain, but I believe the latter is their specialty as opposed to the former, really, or they have different definitions of what pleasure is. But the rest of the story is then focused around Julia trying to rescue Frank sort of from that torment that he's been sort of taken away into after they move into the house that Frank had opened the box in, which I believe was Rory and Frank's sort of parents' house that was left to them after they died. But it's really interesting story. Obviously, like I said, 128 pages, so not particularly long. Clive Barker does a really, really good job at sort of balancing the sort of the beauty and the horror in the things that he discusses. Sort of it almost makes you want to read more, even though it is kind of a bit gross and grim at times. So no, I was really, really impressed with that. We do see parts of the story through another character, a woman called Kirsty, and the story actually ends from her perspective. It did make me feel like the ending fell a little bit flat because of that. I would have liked to seen sort of a bit more of a resolution to Julia's story. Sort of felt like she had been sort of cast aside right at the end, which from a narrative perspective does kind of make sense. That is kind of what happens to her in the story as well. But yeah, apart from that ending, which just kind of felt a little bit flat for me, I really, really enjoyed it and was kind of a bit sort of wishing that it was a bit longer, so we could have had more. But that's all personal preference, but it absolutely didn't take away from my enjoyment of the book. Really, really enjoyed this. And as soon as I finished it, I was like, I know I'm going to want to read more Clive Barker. Was really, really good. Really, really good. So speaking of wanting to read more by Clive Barker, once I had finished The Hellbound Heart, I immediately went out and bought the Scarlet Gospels, which is the sequel to that novella. Then this was published in 2015, so quite a while after the original one was published. And it, like I said, it is a sequel, but only really in name and the fact that Pinhead does return, one of the Cenobites from the original novella. Apart from that, there's almost no connection to the original story. None of the sort of original characters are mentioned, or there's no comebacks, like I said, apart from Pinhead. And even the sort of the feel of the book or the genre is quite different as well. So whilst this is horror, it does very much lean into sort of the fantasy element of it. And the first sort of scene, the prologue, is sort of picks up where the Hellbound Heart sort of left off in terms of the genre, in terms of that sort of that gritty kind of like horror. But after that, it very much then takes a turn into fantasy. So if you are a big fan of horror and fantasy, this is definitely one for you, I think. If you're expecting it to be very much the same as the Hellbound Heart, it is not going to be at all. It is very, very different. Now, the book focuses around a ex-police detective called Harry. He is now a private investigator, and throughout the majority of his life, he's had sort of more encounters than the average person with sort of demons from hell and things like that, including a very sort of traumatic sort of experience that he did have with a particularly nasty demon. I won't go into details about the event, but it's not very nice. And it sort of follows Harry around and sort of influences the decisions and the way he sort of behaves throughout the book. So the majority of the book follows Harry and a sort of eccentric group of acquaintances that he has as they have to traverse through hell to try and rescue Harry's sort of closest friend and ally that was sort of abducted by Pinhead and taken into hell, seemingly as part of sort of this bigger overarching plan that he's got. Like I said, it follows Harry and that group on this sort of wild adventure through hell, and that's kind of the more sort of like fantastical element of the book. There are like smatterings of horror, obviously. It's in hell. It's written by Clive Barker. Of course, there's going to be bits like that in there, but for the most part, like again, like I said, it is sort of a bit more fantasy. That doesn't take away from the experience of the book. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I thought it was personally better than the first one. I enjoyed it a lot more. And I really liked the sort of, we see a lot of the story through Pinhead's perspective, which I didn't expect. I thought he was going to be more sort of just the plot device, um, oh, Pinhead's done this. We have to go and find out why and chase him and that kind of thing. But actually, no, a good portion of the book is from his perspective, and it sort of uncovers his grander plan that he's got, which is kind of seems to come out of nowhere compared to the first story. But again, if you don't treat them as being too sort of intertwined, it's still really, really good in its own right. And there are times where the main sort of cast of characters do feel a little bit more sort of like NPC side characters as opposed to the main characters, and Pinhead really does take the sort of the forefront of it, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it. Would highly recommend it if you're into sort of horror and fantasy. So up third and last of the horror books that I read in December, we have Koji Suzuki's Ring. I always go to say The Ring, but of course it's not. It's Ring. Now, most people, even if you don't read horror, have probably heard of The Ring. Like the sort of the Western depiction of the film. And of course, there is the original Japanese film based on the book as well. I knew I was going to really like this. I've seen the Ring. I haven't seen the Japanese version, but I've seen the Western version of the film, which I know isn't super similar to the original book, but I knew I was going to enjoy it anyway. So after four teenagers die in sort of similarly bizarre circumstances, the uncle of one of them, Asakawa, his name is, he's a journalist. He decides that he's going to sort of investigate it because obviously there's that sort of like familial connection to one of the teenagers that died. And this leads him to a sort of remote like resort park, holiday park, where he ends up staying in one of these small little like cottage rooms and ends up renting a VHS to watch that is unlabeled. And when he watches it, it's got all sorts of weird cryptic messages in the sort of 2 or 3 minutes that it plays for, followed by a message at the end saying that if the person watching it doesn't follow the instructions that are about to be shown, and then they're going to die exactly 7 days from now. And then when it gets to the instructions on the VHS, the recording has been recorded over a further time. This then leads him on a sort of frantic 7-day journey to try and uncover the truth behind the tape and try and work out what the sort of instructions are on how to sort of break the curse and things like that. He recruits sort of a group of friends to help him with that. Some become a little bit more intertwined to the story than others. And I was really glad that we had other people in this to sort of see from their perspective and to sort of hear from them and not just Asakawa the whole way through because he's quite annoying at times, to be honest. Now, I suppose that's quite realistic. If you knew you only had 7 days to try and figure this out, you would be quite rash and impatient and frustrated with people. And that's exactly what he's like pretty much the whole way through. So one of his close friends that ends up sort of going through with this journey with him is quite nice comedic relief at times. Um, because I'm not sure I'd be able to bear just reading the entire, what is it, 350 pages if it was just Asakawa the entire time. But it was really good. My only sort of complaint with it would be that the first half of the book sort of, or the first three quarters of the book felt like it covered the first half of the week, and then the last quarter of the book covered the last like day or 2 days. Um, so we felt like we kind of dragged the first half of the week out and then sort of skimmed through the second half as the ball sort of gets rolling and they start to sort of uncover the mystery. It sort of skips around quite a bit, which I guess kind of makes sense. You know, if you were in that situation, it would be getting quite sort of frantic and hectic towards the end. So it kind of works, I suppose. But yeah, that's my only sort of critique of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's one of those ones where, like the Hellbound Heart, you go into it knowing that you're going to enjoy it. And I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of the 4 books I believe there are in the story now, the story of Sadako. Um, so yeah, definitely looking forward to reading the next one for sure. So we'll move on to the manga now. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is one of the Junji Ito collections that I mentioned earlier, and this one is Frankenstein. I haven't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but I do plan on doing that at some point this year. But obviously, we've seen so many depictions of the story that it's kind of hard to know without reading the original how close any of them are to that original story. So I don't know how close Junji Ito's one is. I would imagine it's probably not. But I did really, really enjoy it. Um, I think it was a really he balanced the actual story really well with his art and his depiction of the actual Frankenstein's monster. I thought was really really good, and again, like I said, sort of kept it feeling like Western, um, or European, I should say. Sorry, but also in his sort of classic sort of Japanese horror art style as well. So I thought it was really, really good. The rest of the stories in the book are really good as well. The majority of them focus around a sort of teenage boy called Oshikiri. So similar to the Soichi stories, if you've read them. And they sort of focus around Oshikiri's house that he lives in by himself. And these sort of weird happenings go on. And the first few stories are kind of contradictory to a degree. Like they don't make sense. Like it's the same boy in the same house, but all these weird things keep happening to him. And then as the stories go through, sort of it's uncovered sort of why they don't connect or why they feel contradictory and things like that. And it was a really good payoff. And I actually preferred the stories quite a bit more to the Soichi ones. They were published around the same sort of time as the Soichi collection as well. So it was like from 1989 through to the sort of early to mid 90s. They sort of were released each Halloween sort of in parallel. And I've already read the Soichi stories, but I much prefer the ones focusing around Oshikiri, to be honest. There's also a couple of other short stories towards the end. One's called Face Firmly in Place, which I really enjoyed as well. It was only a few pages long and I kind of wish we'd had more of it, but it was really, really good. And then there's a couple of sort of comedic relief ones at the end, focused around a manga author, his mother, and their cat. And it's from the cat's perspective. And I believe it's meant to be sort of autobiographical in terms of Junji Ito's like early work and early life with the cat living with his mother, and it was a nice way to end the book. But I always feel a little bit sort of like shortchanged when we don't get a couple of horror stories, and we have those ones in, but yeah, it is what it is. So up next, and the second Junji Ito collection that I read this month, we have Alley, which was published in 2024 in English. So it is one of the newer ones. I believe there's only 3 more that have been published since, and I think this makes this the second newest collection that I have currently as well. But this was really, really good. I think this is one of his better collections of stories that they've put together. Um, sort of balances the story with the artwork really really well throughout, similar to the Frankenstein depiction that I mentioned earlier. But it's one of the things that sometimes can be a bit hit or miss with Junji Ito stories is sometimes the story can be really good, but if it's from one of his really earlier works, the artwork's not quite to the same level as his later stuff. or it's the opposite and the artwork's amazing. You know, the images are really really creepy, kind of almost jump scare you, sort of when you turn the page. But the actual story itself is kind of leaves a little to be desired and isn't necessarily the most engaging or interesting. But I think the Alley collection has pretty much every story in it, balances it really, really well. There were some standout favorites for me in there. Mold was one of them, and Ice Cream Bus was the other, which was also the last one. And like I said, talking about the Frankenstein collection, sometimes these collections do peter out a little bit, and it's the ones at the end are kind of just shoved in to sort of like fill the pages out, and they're sort of put there because they have to go somewhere. So ending on a really, really good story was really nice this time round. And that was a really, really creepy one. Sort of, you know, morbid curiosity. What the hell is this really bizarre ice cream bus driver up to? And of course, in classic Ito style, the twist and the reveal is absolutely nothing that you could have guessed, and is kind of just weird and horrifying, all in one go. But yeah, there's loads of good stories in this one, and I would, if you haven't read any of his books or any of his collections of stories, then I would probably recommend this one as like a first one. I think it's, like I said, it balances everything to do with his work really, really well. And if you're not sure if you're going to sort of enjoy all of his work, I think this is a good place to start, especially if you don't want to commit to one of his bigger stories like Tobie or Uzumaki or things like that, which obviously are very good in their own right. The final thing I read in December, and the final manga, of course, is it was a reread actually, of Steins Gate. I'm not sure if you can see that. There you go. So Steins Gate, I read the I watched the anime about 5 or 6 years ago now, and I absolutely loved it. It's still one of my favorite animes and stories to date. It is very sci-fi, so there's not really any horror in this. It is predominantly sci-fi, but what I really like about it, without giving too much away, is the fact that it's sort of there's time travel with consequences. That's one of my sort of favorite things, is when time travel is involved in a story, but it actually has consequences. It's not just as simple as just hopping back and forward and nothing bad happens because of it. I'm actually making a separate video about this at some point in the future, so I'm not really going to go into too much detail about it. But what I would say is that the first half is a bit of a slower sort of burn compared to the second half, um, but not as bad as the anime. And that's kind of what my video is going to be focusing around, is why I believe that the manga is the best way to sort of experience the story first. I'm currently making my way through the visual novel as well at the moment, just to try and sort of compare all three of those ways of experiencing it. But I, you know, currently still do believe that the manga is the best way to read it and to experience the story first. Um, Once you get to sort of the halfway point, it just all hell goes loose, and it's just sort of non-stop, all the way through to the end. It's tragic at times. There is like sort of psychological horror, I think, is the sort of the only way you could claim there is a little bit of horror in it, but it is psychological for sure. The things that the main character goes through, Ocarina is his name that he's so lovingly called by his close friends. Um, the things he goes through are sort of tragic and are horrifying, and the ending is quite a nice resolution, but the things he has to go through to get there sort of does pay that off as well. There is also a sort of alternate timeline sequel called Steins Gate Zero, which I'm currently in the process of rereading as well, and that is based on sort of the timeline in which the resolution isn't so good. So if the resolution to this hadn't been quite so good, that's the story that follows. But yeah, no, I absolutely love Steins Gate, and if you haven't read it or watched the anime, I highly suggest that you do read it. And like I said, I believe that the manga is the best way to experience it first. But there will be a video coming out at some point in the future about that. So, like I said earlier, please subscribe to the channel if you do want to sort of keep an eye out for that. So that's that for the reading recap for the month of December. Let me know down below in the comments whether you read any of these books previously, and what you thought of them, or whether they're on your TBR list for the year of 2026. And also let me know what you thought of the sort of the amount of like detail that I went into with them. I tried to keep them as sort of vague as possible, so that if you do decide to go on to read any of these books, if you haven't read them before, hopefully I didn't give too much away. You know, I much prefer going into a book as blind as possible, ideally, so I don't want to sort of ruin that experience for anyone else. But like I said, let me know down below your thoughts. I'm obviously trying to sort of make these videos as sort of beneficial and detailed for people as possible, so you sort of get a good idea of what these books are, but like I said, without sort of giving too much information away. As I said earlier as well, if you could like the video, that would obviously really help it out a lot. And if you have enjoyed the video, please do subscribe to the channel to be notified of any future videos that come out. And I will have my previous video come up onto the screen now. That is my January TBR video, so please do go check that out. Hopefully I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.